The millionaire's mansion was under siege. Shouts filled the air, glass shattered, and masked men stormed inside. His family trembled in fear, but one woman stood completely still. She was only the maid dressed in plain black. Yet her calmness burned brighter than any weapon, and when she finally moved, her action shocked the entire world. The sound of chaos ripped through the mansion. Heavy boots crashed against marble floors, drawers flung open, valuables seized without hesitation. Masks hid the robbers' faces, but their menace was impossible to hide. The millionaire Edward Kane stood frozen, clutching his wife and teenage son as fear wrapped its hands around his throat. For all his wealth, for all his power, he was helpless now. But at the far end of the great hall, near the grand staircase, someone did not tremble. The maid, Ruth, stood with her back straight, her hands folded in front of her, as though she were watching nothing more than a passing storm. Her silence clashed against the panic that tore through the mansion. She did not cry. She did not beg. She did not move. One of the robbers snarled, pointing at her. Why isn't she afraid? His voice cracked with irritation, because power demands fear, and Ruth offered none. The other men laughed harshly, yet unease spread in their eyes. For all their weapons, they could not shatter her calm. The millionaire noticed his gaze clung to her steady form. He wondered, what kind of strength lives in her? Why does she not break like the rest of us? But Ruth's story had begun long before this night. Years ago, she had been a soldier. The desert sun had blistered her skin. The stench of dust and fire had filled her lungs, and the cries of comrades had seared into her soul. She had buried brothers and sisters who never came home, and she had carried silence where others carried medals. For her, fear was not an option. It was a luxury. And when she returned, no parade welcomed her, no fortune waited. She became invisible. She became a maid in the house of a man who never asked about her scars, who never knew that his servant once carried the weight of a battlefield, and yet she never complained. She polished silver until it gleamed, swept floors until they shone, and carried herself with the dignity of someone who knew battles are not fought for applause. Now, as the robbers tore apart the home, her training whispered to her bones. Her breathing slowed, her heart held steady, and her eyes studied every movement. The weight of each weapon, the nervous twitch in each robber's hand, the narrow window of weakness in their chaos. Edward's wife sobbed against his chest. His son whispered, "We're going to die, aren't we?" Edward wanted to comfort him, but the words caught like stone in his throat. And then, through his panic, he heard a voice. Ruth's voice. Soft, steady, unshakable. "Fear only feeds them," she said, her tone calm as still water. The robbers barked a laugh, mocking her, yet unease rippled through them again. Their eyes darted as though they could not trust silence so sharp. One of them pointed his weapon toward her. "You think you're brave," he sneered. Ruth did not flinch. She only whispered, "Bravery is when fear doesn't choose for you." The words settled in the hall like thunder, though spoken softly. Even Edward felt them strike his chest, shaming the fear that had chained him. As the robbers pressed deeper into the house, Ruth began to move. Not with haste, not with panic, but with precision. She guided Edward's family to the far wall, her hand firm on the boy's shoulder. She scanned the room, her soldier's mind calculating every escape. And when the moment came, when two of the robbers argued, distracted over a box of jewels, she acted. She seized a heavy iron candlestick from the mantel, swung with the force of memory, and struck the nearest attacker across the arm. His weapon clattered to the floor. In the chaos, she pressed the gun into Edward's shaking hands. His fingers trembled, but Ruth's eyes locked onto his, steady and commanding. "Stand like a man your son can remember," she whispered. The words were fire. Edward's hands steadied, his breath deepened, and for the first time that night he felt something other than fear. The robbers, startled by the sudden shift, stumbled. Ruth moved again, swift and quiet, using every ounce of her training, not to kill, but to disarm, to protect. The mansion that had once been a stage of wealth became a battlefield of silent honor. And in that battlefield, it was not money or marble that held power. It was Ruth. The robbers fled, dragging their wounded comrade, their arrogance shattered by a woman they had dismissed as nothing more than a servant. Their departure left silence thicker than smoke. Edward collapsed into a chair, his body shaking. His wife clutched their son, tears of relief streaming down her face. And in the middle of it all, Ruth stood as she had begun. Calm, her chest rising and falling with measured breath. Edward rose, his eyes wet, his voice breaking. Why didn't you tell me who you were, what you've done? Ruth's gaze was steady. I am not what I was paid to be. I'm what I choose to be when it matters. The room held its breath. The boy whispered almost in awe, "You're a hero!" Ruth shook her head gently. Heroes are the ones who never came home. I am only their echo. Those words, soft but carved in truth, would echo far beyond the mansion. For when the news spread of what happened that night, people spoke not of the millionaire's wealth, nor the jewels nearly lost, but of the maid who faced armed men with nothing but calm. They spoke of her silence that broke arrogance, her strength that shamed wealth, and her words that reminded the world that dignity cannot be bought. It must be lived. And for Edward Kane, who once thought power came only from fortune, the greatest fortune he ever gained was the lesson Ruth left him. Respect belongs not to money, but to the silent strength that holds the world together. From that day forward, he no longer saw her as a maid. He saw her as the reason his family lived, as the protector whose honor outweighed gold. And Ruth! She returned to her duties quietly, polishing silver as though nothing had happened. For she did not need the world's applause. Her silence was her strength, and her strength was her legacy. Silent strength is often the most powerful force in the world. We may never know the unseen battles someone has fought, the scars they carry, or the honor they hold in silence. Ruth's calm did not just save her family. It reminded us all that dignity is the greatest weapon of all. Where are you watching this story from? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Ruth's silence was her greatest strength? Subscribe for more cinematic stories of unseen heroes.